one of the company that didn't give me an offer, they ended up investing in the fund many years later, and it really helped me feel like I belong finally, like that this, yes, there's a place for everyone, and I don't have to necessarily, work for a household name company. I can go somewhere else and, do my own thing, and that's okay. And so that helped me feel a big sense of closure that, we had worked our way up and finally, had recognition from some of the larger companies in our industry.
Thanks for listening to IBKR's Sense of Security. As always, there's more content at ibkrpodcast.com. And if you're interested in learning more about interactive brokers, visit ibkr.com. We offer more trading education content such as webinars, market commentary, market-related courses, and quant-related articles at ibkrcampus.com.
Welcome back to the Sense of Securities podcast. I'm Cassidy Clement, Senior Manager of SEO and Content at Interactive Brokers. Today, I'm your host for our podcast. Our guest is Christina Qi. She is the CEO of market data platform Databento and formerly founded Domeyard LP, which was a hedge fund focused on high-frequency trading. Her journey from the world of intern to hedge fund came with its peaks and valleys. These lessons from the challenging industry helped her find a voice in a way that makes an impact. It's only fitting that today we're going to discuss leadership and mentoring in the finance space. So welcome to the program, Christina.
Thanks for having me, Cassidy.
Sure. So to kick this off, let's start out at the beginning. Let's talk about your origin story. Let's talk about some of your financial service college internships, and then also how your college experience was. So what was that like? What was that background like for you?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Salt Lake City, the suburbs of Salt Lake City, Utah. So basically think about it as northern Utah, middle of nowhere. There was one Chinese restaurant in town, and I'm Chinese. So that's to give you a sense of, how much I stood out a little bit. But that's really important to note because I went to a really good college. I went to MIT, and it was a struggle since from day one to the day I graduated. It was a giant struggle for me, for better or worse. Yes, it is a struggle for many students, but I think especially for me, I, didn't know what I wanted to major in. I had just, I had taken classes in certain departments I wanted to major in, and then I got like a C in biology, and I got a C in computer science, and those professors were like, you probably shouldn't major in that. And so I ended up majoring in something called management science, which is kind of the major that everyone studies when they don't know what they want to major in, and it's kind of like the last resort kind of thing. And so I did that. And then thankfully that is actually the kind of finance major basically for undergrads at MIT. And so that was why I kind of ended up in finance. And then after that, every summer it was like I applied to internships because that's kind of what you do when you go to these schools. Is like I didn't know this, but then everyone was applying to internships. So I started applying over and over again, and I would just get rejected left and right. And finally changed up my strategy. I'm like, you know what? I'm from Utah. Let me apply to this one giant bank whose name you probably do know about, a bulge bracket, who I can't mention, in Utah. So I applied to this giant bank in Utah, and I got it because the pool's a lot less competitive than New York. And so that's kind of how I got my foot in the door, and I applied to divisions that weren't as popular. I know everyone wants to do sales and trading or investment banking. I was like, you know what? I will do a back office job. I will intern anywhere just to get my foot in the door. So I applied and got into, it was like an operations position. And I loved it. It just opened my eyes to the world and to, what was out there and how to even work in society, because I've never done that before as a student. And so that's kind of how I got my foot in the door. And then after that, just kind of utilized that experience to get closer to maybe the kind of position that I wanted, which was more in the trading space. I still wanted to try out trading for at least one summer. So I did that at another larger bank. And then after that, that was when I started my hedge fund.
Got it. So that's kind of how you led into the finance trading exposure, I guess. So in some ways, I can kind of relate to that. I went to a smaller school where I'm from, and in some ways, it's nice to be bigger fish, little pond, because it makes the pool, as you said, a little smaller, and it helps you narrow down your options for what you'd like. But at the same time, it allows you to wear so many more hats likely than you were at some of these larger places, because there's a lot of places that surprisingly people will find, while they might appear to have a corporate budget, they still have a startup culture where, it's expected that you try a bunch of other things and maybe carry some projects over the finish line instead of just start out and hand it off. So if you were to travel back in time, what's one piece that you would give yourself as advice since you went through all of that? Because a lot of people, especially when you're starting out and you're trying all these different things, I mean, I had 4 different internships by the time I graduated. And I would say to myself, yeah, that's pretty cool. Go ahead, sample the buffet, see what you like. But some other people get a little discouraged if they're only able to tap into one. What would you tell yourself?
To be honest, for me, I had no choice on what kind of jobs. I can just, pick between a couple of different internships. Some of my college dorm mates in my dorm had quite a few different choices, but that's because they were, they had a great GPA. They were very ambitious. They, always went to networking events and stuff. And for me, I wasn't quite like that. And so it was definitely a bigger struggle for me to be able to get whatever I could. And I'm really glad my favorite internship actually was still the operations internship in Salt Lake City. Yes, it's not investment banking in New York. Yes, it's not the one that everyone wants, but it was super fun. And you're right, it's like it's a smaller pond kind of environment, but it's like everyone was it's a lot more friendly. It's a lot less competitive. People were really kind during the internship too. I remember so one of my fellow interns, like her parents came in town from Brazil, and they were like, just take the day off. Like, it doesn't matter, we'll still pay you, just take the day off. And I was like, that's so nice. Like, who does that, and pays you while you can take a day off. And it was just a lot more human of an experience. And I really appreciate that. It taught me how to set a good work culture and a good work environment, I hope. And so yeah, it was like just lots of great lessons learned from that. And I'm still friends with some of those folks from that internship, which I think says a lot, like when you're still friends with a lot of people from that summer and, still hang out whenever we're all in town, like we all hang out with each other. So that's definitely super fun. My only piece of advice I think I'd definitely give myself and try my best to do better at in college was just, I was really bad at handling rejection in college. I remember the first time in internship, I was a freshman and I was applying to internships, and one of them like rejected me, and I started crying. And I remember my roommates were like, what? They were all trying to like make me feel better, but I just felt so awful that that people didn't want to hire me. And then I thought about it. I'm like, wait a second, like I have no experience whatsoever. No one would want to hire me. And it's a very competitive job pool. And some of these companies only look for like 1 or 2 interns every summer, and they probably get bombarded with resumes every day. And so for me, the lesson learned there was like, hey, I could have, now, like, as my job, by the way, I get rejected all the time today. I'm getting rejected by investors. Service providers don't want to work with me for whatever reason, even though we have the money to pay them. Or, job applicants, now we're giving out offers and people will say no or just flat out ghost us, right? And that happens all the time, and it's normal. And I wish I had known back then that like that's a normal part of the process. Like, it's on average, like the average job applicant, where they apply to like 100 jobs and they get rejected by like so many of them. That's completely normal, and like that's okay. And like I've learned in this environment, we just put that like I call it a mountain of rejections, and I just like move on with my life. And so I just wish that I'd known that earlier when I was a student, so I could like not be afraid to like put myself out there, apply to all those jobs, and like don't be afraid of those rejections. Like, what's so bad about a no? They're not trying to stab you or hurt you.
Right. I mean, realistically, especially now with the amount of remote or hybrid or in-office opportunities, I think what has changed a little bit, because there's such an abundance, at least that you could see on job posting websites, you feel as if, well, look at all of this. Look at all these opportunities. Why not me? And that's a great, ambitious attitude to have. However, it's super important to also remember that no and constructive criticism or constructive feedback is a huge part of that journey. And I have to say, as one of many grandchildren in an Italian family, you get used to that very quickly. The criticism is part of growing up, or part of the feedback, or part of growing. I was lucky enough to learn that when having Sunday dinner and helping making pasta, but not a lot of people get that very early. And when you start to get out there with something that you work so hard at, a lot of people, like the My Baby type projects, things that you work so hard on, your portfolio, and you bury your soul sometimes. You're like, why didn't that work out? But it's okay. No can be part of the process, and it may lead to something even better.
I agree. Yeah, no's often lead to yeses. And, and sometimes if they do provide feedback, I think it's very valuable to, to me or to whoever's getting rejected. I think that's a really good thing. I totally agree. I wish I'd grown up in an big Italian family. I grew up in a tiny Chinese family, and my parents kind of sheltered me. And so I guess I just was not used to that until go out to college in the real world. And I just was like, what is happening out here? And definitely was a little scary for me to first enter the working environment and to experience those rejections and experience, even just interning during the summer. One of my internships, I didn't get a return offer, by the way. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I worked so hard, to get the internship. And then somewhere along the way, I bombed. I shouldn't say bombed it. I failed it. Something wrong happened. And and I was, to be honest, I just didn't live up to the standards that had set for me. And so, that happens as well. And it definitely was a huge blow to not get an offer either. And, to go back to college. And it was funny because I was a senior by then. I was about to graduate, and all of my, when you go to a really competitive college, all of your friends and classmates have multiple job offers. And here I am, I'm back at square one, applying to hundreds of internships and jobs. I will intern after I graduate. I don't mind. I will take any kind of job, any internship that will accept me. And I was just getting rejected left and right because I didn't get that return offer. And it was screaming on my resume that something is wrong with me. And so yeah, just stuff like that, but still learning to keep going and not to give up after that, I think is definitely really important.
And I think that translates a lot into, of course, postgraduate employment as well. Economies ebb and flow, job markets ebb and flow, but it's important to keep some type of a head up mentality because you never know what's coming down the line. So with that, let's talk about the second part, which is you got the graduation, you got the diploma. So how did you get into finance? Because you liked to make an impact as much as you liked the professional accolades, we could say, as much as the nonprofit volunteer work. So how exactly did you get into the finance space? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, so after I'd been rejected from the internship, then I just was applying to jobs left and right, and it was about to graduate. There was didn't really have a bright future ahead of me. At least back then, I was just felt kind of depressed about the entire situation. And then when I remember some of my people in my dorm was like, hey, I've been in Google and Microsoft. And I was like, can you just give me your leftovers? I will take any job. Is that's how desperate I was. But anyway, then one of my friends in my dorm, she suggested, hey, why don't you just that summer internship. So during my final internship, our final project was to do a trading strategy, basically come up with a trading strategy and present it to the entire floor on the last day. And so I did that, and I presented a strategy it was a quantitative strategy on a statistical arbitrage or some kind of very very quantitative thing. And the team absolutely hated it. And I'm pretty sure I don't know if I mentioned interactive brokers or wherever, but yeah, I did look at various kind of broker tools to see what I could do with more of a quantitative focus. And so, but anyway, presented it, and my team hated it. And there's a reason for that. It's actually because they are a discretionary trading desk, and they don't do this kind of stuff. Quantitative trading was still, it was around, but there were, a lot of teams still didn't really adopt that and didn't see themselves as, they were kind of anti-quant at the time. And so then, so then they were my friends were why don't you just trade that strategy? And look, if it doesn't work, you have closure on a difficult summer. And if it does work, then great, you can have a, side project, you can continue working on it, right? And I was actually, I might just do that because there's nothing else for me to do. And so I started trading it on my own, and, just it wasn't high frequency trading, by the way. This was just a very kind of low frequency, very kind of basic strategy back then. And as I was testing it out and working on it, at first it didn't work actually, but then what got me into it was it just felt exciting, I felt I was learning something, and I felt and I love how in trading that there's an instant feedback cycle, basically. Like you can see how good or bad you're doing based on your trades, right? And I really like that the feedback is so instant in this industry. And so I decided, you know what, like I like this. Like I want to continue going and continue revising this until I find something that works. And by the end of the year, we had found something that worked. I had also found a couple co-founders that wanted to work with me, which was also really fun. And so we ended up deciding, let's just start this business together and just see where it goes. So that's kind of the origin of the hedge fund. And then, fast forward 10 years, it was just what a journey of a decade. But that was our origin. We had no ambitions to be billionaires or even to be rich. It was just like, let's pay off our college loans and get us a job. And then hopefully we'll have a start in our careers rather than, being all jobless and not knowing what to do. So that was our origin.
Got it. So I know that you'd mentioned this in there, but how was Interactive Brokers part of that start at all? I mean, I've been here 5.5 years. I work for the company, but what was kind of the integration of some of our items there?
Yeah, for sure. So this was a long time ago, so I'm sure your products have changed by now. But it was just, I remember registering like for an account with Interactive Brokers and then seeing, okay, hey, can we, see if we can run some of our strategies on there and, go from there. And so definitely, I'm really grateful for Interactive Brokers for those early days of my career and, being able to get started instantly, which was great, but also look, it's a cheap platform, which also helps a lot as I was a student with no money whatsoever. And of course, as we scaled over time and wanted, better, like a more, like more bespoke services or direct connectivity or whatever other kinds of services we needed, right? Then eventually we would upgrade or pay for those types of services. But I love how it's available and accessible to people of all levels, including when I was a beginner. And by the way, when I starting a hedge fund, the first thing I did was I went on Google, by the way, and I Googled how to start a hedge fund. And then it was like, you need a broker, you need a, and I was like, okay, that was a part of the list. And so then I Googled around, and that was literally how I found you guys, was I Googled around for brokers that were able to kind of handle this kind of strategy. It wasn't just like, retail manual trades, but rather we wanted to try to put in some automations and, if there was like some kind of API access, that would be great. And so we were looking for a broker that had a little bit more of these kind of technical features that we wanted. And so, yeah, that was our kind of beginner story with you guys.
So that was kind of your stumble upon moment, but more so out of that initial stage. Once you guys got going, what are some highlights and lowlights that you kind of look back on and were like, I'm thankful that happened. It helped me realize X, Y, or Z?
Wow. So many highlights and lowlights everywhere, to be honest. Like, it's hard to summarize over a decade, but maybe I'll mention a highlight and maybe mention a lowlight. So, so the highlight was one of the company that didn't give me an offer. They ended up investing in the fund many years later, and it really helped me feel like I belong finally, like that this, yes, there's a place for everyone, and I don't have to necessarily, work for a household name company. I can go somewhere else and, do my own thing, and that's okay. And so that helped me feel a big sense of closure that, we had worked our way up and finally, have recognition from some of the larger companies in our industry. So that really helped me to just feel like I belong a little bit more, especially just given how weird my background. I totally understand. It's really weird, by the way, just unusual to start a hedge fund out of college. I think it's becoming a little more common. There's a lot more startups these days, and I love that. And, we'll always encourage people to go for it. But definitely back then it was a little bit strange. And so yeah, like that was definitely one of the highlights. And then lowlights, oh my gosh, so many. I mean, we did every other thing wrong to the point where one of the funny things was actually we had written a list of principles kind of mirroring, like Principles by Ray Dalio, like that, his famous book that came out, it's a New York Times bestseller, and thinking, well, I want to do a better job at this. And so we wrote some principles that were kind of millennial driven, by the way. So if you guys are like millennial or Gen Z, you might kind of understand this. We wanted a flat structure in the company. We wanted lots of perks, let's we had like, I remember art easels in the office. We had a soccer ball, we had foosball, we had like video games.
The usual
like,
question is, how many beanbags were in the office? That's usually the question.
Oh my gosh. Thankfully, none, but we had bouncy balls, like, those balls you sit on?
Oh, same difference. Same difference. It's same neighborhood, different street. That's all that
Yeah,
is.
different kind of
Yeah.
nerd, right? So
Yeah.
we had all those things. We had a nap room. And so the office like looked almost probably like a Google campus, maybe is what I kind of imagine, or Facebook campus kind of environment, rather than like a Wall Street. I imagine on Wall Street there's like cubicles and it's a totally different environment. Everyone's dressed all formally. And here we're like, okay, let's just have a casual dress code and just wear what you feel comfortable in. And so that's what we did. But then it turns out all of those perks that we offered and all those like kinds of cultural things we did were wrong in the end. And what I mean by wrong is like people were still quitting, people were leaving, and I'm like, wait, we have a bouncy ball, we have we have free food, we have all these perks.
Did you see all our easels?
Yeah, look at our art easels, like our bouncy balls. Like, why don't you want to work here? And they would be like, well, Christina, like, look, someone actually told me this is great advice. They said, like, people don't stay because of free food and perks and benefits like that. And yeah, it's cool, you're in a high rise and the view's nice, but like that doesn't matter, right? People stay because their voice is being heard, their contributions are being valued, they feel like they're growing and learning in their career. And I was like, wow, you're right. Like, we had forgotten about kind of the in our pursuit of being cool and trendy, I think we had lost track of the roots of kind of why we work, right? It's a job at the end of the day. And, in a job, like, you want to feel valued and heard. And so I think we had just kind of missed that. And then, we had to, over time, we changed our culture and like, and it was funny actually getting rid of the free food. Nobody missed it, by the way, which was surprising to me. Not a single person complained and said, oh, if only we had the free food today. Not a single person did that. And the reason why, which is interesting, when we did have free food, sorry, this is a super niche topic, but I think this is interesting. So in case for those of you who are looking for jobs, by the way, this is important. When companies offer free food on their brochures or on their website, don't fall for this. So whenever we offer free food, there was always drama every time. Like, we have a vegan, we have a vegetarian, we have an ovo-lacto vegetarian, which is a different type of vegetarian. We have someone on an Atkins diet. We had a Whole30, and I learned and memorized all the diets because by then we had to know. We had someone who was keto, gluten-free, all the allergies, peanuts, whatever. And so it became like a nightmare because there was always a meal every time we ordered something somebody couldn't eat. Somebody had to go out and begrudgingly go order some food and was upset. And then if that happened 2 days in a row, they would be extra upset. And that kind of grudge would kind of compound over time because, it was unfair. Yeah. Like the meatitarians on the team ate quite a lot of food because, the meat is just kind of in Boston, in a city with lots of food, like everything just had meat in it, and so, yeah, it was definitely, just culture-wise, we had learned those lessons kind of the hard way. And then, over time had to adjust and realize like, hey, instead of putting all this money, thousands and thousands of dollars into food, let's put that into bonuses instead. And people liked that. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting a bonus, like that, that actually made a lot more to people than the free food that not everyone would eat, right? And so I think fairness is a really big thing within companies, and especially when it's like in person work environment. It was so important. It was amplified whenever something was unfair. I think that like amplified everything a little bit just because it was in person. So yeah, just beware, job applicants out there, like don't fall for those perks.
Yeah, so it's good though that you and your co-founders or your peers were able to take those lowlights and at least, take a second and think about it, because a lot of times, I mean, I've had internships in the collared shirt, Banana Republic dress up scenario versus the joggers and hanging with the programmers on a beanbag. I remember doing meta updates near a couch with a dog, loved it, but they were different feels. And some cultures work for some types of companies or groups, but it's good that you guys are able to easily say, hey, listen, we tried it. We're going to try something else that might fit our squad a little bit better. So what made you change gears then from that? I mean, I'm sure like the highs were like, whoa, and then the lows you were like, uh-oh. Because, I mean, you're usually working with big numbers. What made you go over to a market data company? What made you want to go into that area?
Yeah, so it's actually funny because in my career, I feel like I went backwards than what most people do, which is, a lot of people want to go into a hedge fund. That's like their end goal. They always want to do that and dream about it. Whereas for me, I went from a hedge fund to working for a service provider, which is like kind of backwards. We're providing data now for hedge funds. And so the reason why was mainly because by then, had been almost 10 years and I had burnt out a little bit from just all of those lessons and experiences and everything. And yes, it was a wonderful experience, but definitely felt like it was time to move on. And I wanted to also do something that was making a difference for the world. And I originally started, like, again, the goal was just pay off my student loans and get a job. And now that I had a job and I had to back, over many years, you discover, oh, hey, like I have a lot of privilege now. I've earned a lot of, like success, I guess. And I don't want to say that word, but you know what I mean? I've like just kind of had a lot of those, like, I guess, external accolades that I don't know if they mean anything, but like at least people are telling me and recognizing the work that we're doing, which has been great. But then, it was definitely rough. So in 2020, we had a really rough year trading, by the way. We were down 12%. And I think that I kind of use that as I don't know if it's an excuse, but thinking like, hey, yes, we could recover from it, and also our investors, wanted us to stay and continue. But for me, I really wanted to get out there and, work on an idea that we were passionate about. And at the time, we were dealing with a lot of data. We were spending millions of dollars on data providers and data sold by headcount. So like every time we hired someone, they would beg me for data. And that took 6 to 12 months before we got them any data, which was really sad. So we were thinking, how can we create a more, more accessible, kind of like interactive brokers, but like for data. So like something that's accessible to people of all levels. We have on our platform now, we have students using us. We have high frequency traders using the platform. And I love that it's accessible and available to everyone, regardless of their level and, experience and so on. And so yeah, we wanted to just create something to lower the barriers to entry as well, but while still, utilizing our financial experience and background. So that was why we pivoted it and started out, I guess it wasn't even a pivot, it was just starting a completely new company. And then some people left and came with me, and then some people decided to stay, and that was okay. And so we kind of split off at that point in time around COVID and decided to, start working on a new venture. Yeah.
So a lot of the main ideas that you had mentioned in there was kind of, I know you said you kind of were backwards in your process, I guess, or your journey, but you kind of were looking at it, and I know you and I had this conversation in one of our previous conversations where you had said something like, at some point somebody asked you, do you want in finance to make a difference, or are you just looking to get into one of these larger companies? And you thought, like, why can't I do both? Why can't I make a difference and also have a decent company, which, I completely agree with. In contrary to popular belief, you can have a decent company and also give back. So you're able, with a lot of these leadership notes that I have in front of me and these mentoring items, such as development for careers and invest in girls and other things like that. How do you normally tell people, these are some ways to kind of get into trading and retirement planning and stuff like that without having the connotation of, oh, well, you ran a financial company. So sometimes it's hard for people to always be like, oh, well, for people starting out, I want to hear somebody starting out. But also it's important, in my opinion, to listen to those people who've gotten a great track record like yourself to say, hey, listen, I've done it. I've got the highs, I've had the lows. What type of advice you usually give to people for getting started?
Oh man, I mean, you're right. Speaking about doing good, by the way, for me, I faced almost like a cognitive dissonance in school when, when your professors are telling you to go out there and make a difference in the world. I took a class on poverty, by the way, in college. And I remember, right, it was just like ironic. It was just such a great class. And we learn about, just how, like how people are poor, but how they stay poor and the cycle of poverty and everything. And it just opened my eyes to so much. But then I remember during one of the exams, I got a phone call and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember rushing out of like the room to go take the call, which I felt really bad because I was like disrupting the class. And then I took the call and they're like, we're going to give you an internship. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was freaking out, but I thought, not ironic, but just like what a weird cognitive dissonance of like getting an offer from a giant financial bulge bracket while like taking a test on poverty. And I failed that test, by the way. I remember I did really poorly. I couldn't think afterwards because I had gotten like a really great internship. And so our business model is that we make rich people even richer by definition, by the way. Like as a hedge fund, we can't just accept money from, my mom and dad. Like they don't have, they don't qualify as like, it's called a high net worth individual, that you have to, qualify for something in order to like invest into a hedge fund to begin with. And so because of certain rules in the US, and this was like before the Jobs Act, and even after the Jobs Act, it's still kind of a risky thing because pooling money from, like millions of smaller checks, like usually is not like, they're like I guess it's just riskier when you have more checks and more signatures on hand. And so, as a hedge fund, though, our structure by definition back then is just like, we have to pool money from ultra high net worth individuals, and we trade their money. And then hopefully if we do well enough, we'll take a cut of the, revenues that we end up taking home. That was the business model of what we did. And yes, we can trade in, you might have heard of ESG, so environmental social governance. You can, divest from fossil fuels. You can invest in products that are, better for the environment and economy and stuff. But even then, ESG scoring criteria were flawed. There's companies like oil companies that have really great ESG ratings, and you're like, wait, they're like an oil company that spilled millions of barrels of oil into the ocean. Why are they, considered a great ESG like friendly company, right? And so it's just like the criteria, people can find ways to game that criteria. There's a lot of hedge funds that are calling themselves ESG funds to raise more money, but they're really not. And so that's just like, yes, you could technically invest in better things, but at the end of the day, your business model is that you're still making these rich people richer than they actually, even more rich. And so I think that cognitive dissonance just kind of grew on me over time, to be honest. And like, yes, there is some good we're doing, like we're hiring people, we're giving people jobs, we're helping them feed their families. And I definitely appreciate that. But I wanted to do something, when like, it's kind of like when I imagine if I'm on my deathbed and, when I'm like a lot older, I want to be able to, have hopefully like other companies and other people out there saying, hey, thank you. You helped us launch our startup faster. You helped us launch our ideas faster with a limited budget, and I thought that would be really fun to be able to kind of help others in the industry get a head start. And I imagine myself in, their shoes early on too, like when we were starting our startup too, and how much of a frustration that was to be able to get our foot off the ground. And so to even just get running, to get starting to crawl and walk and all those baby steps, and just thinking about those and how can we make it easier for people if we can, assist them in some way. And so, yeah, it was, but definitely cognitive dissonance definitely grew. By the way, the other thing I should mention is that it's, yes, there's cognitive dissonance, but at the same time, look, it's a competitive job market right now. Amazon and Microsoft and Google, they're not hiring, they're firing people right now. And that makes the pool even more crowded because all those people who should be going to work at Amazon every year, which is quite a lot of people, now they're all looking for a job too. And so the pool is the most competitive it's ever been. So I totally understand. Some people like me, I just wanted a job and I couldn't even get a job, but like I just needed some job to go, just a paycheck so that I could go home and pay my rent, right? Like, and buy some food and stuff. And so I totally understand. It's a competitive job environment. Plus, as a student, we are in debt. I had $40,000 in student loans I had to pay off. So like realistically speaking, yeah, like if you don't have the means to afford that and you need to find a way to pay that off immediately, yeah, absolutely. Find a job that pays you a lot of money, right? And like go for it. There's nothing like bad about being, it's not even selfish. It's just taking care of yourself, which is not selfish. I think that's a good thing, to take care of yourself and to prioritize your health and your mental health, and make sure that, those are, that you feel like you have a stability in your life. Like that's so, so important. And so in this environment, I think absolutely, like, yes, your professor is telling you to do good. And I get that, like for students who have a lot of privilege and can do that on day one, yeah, absolutely go for it, do things that, are good for the world that you want to go into. But then, for some folks who are out there like me, where it's like, it's just hard to get a job and I was struggling so much, like, yeah, then you know what, like get whatever job you can. And like, once you find your footing, once you feel more stable, then you can go out there and apply to, the kinds of jobs that you really want to do.
So covering a lot of these pieces, usually, at least historically, we could say, within the finance industry, it's generally been rather male dominated. That started to change in the past several decades. But, as a woman in the finance industry, what are some experiences and anecdotes you could share for other women and girls getting started? I mean, for some, they may be first generation college or first generation homeowners, things like that. I mean, obviously, we've discussed some trading and retirement planning, those types of things. Some generations were not privileged enough to be able to take advantage of or learn about. Thankfully, with the internet and companies offering various trading platforms and pieces, it's a little bit more accessible. But, what are some experiences that you have that are would be rather interesting to our listeners?
Yeah, for sure. So I totally get it. Like it's such a tough environment, and in terms of advice these days, I would say first off, as a woman, like I like look, nobody wakes up and says, "Woe is me, I'm a woman," right? Like, oh, it's so tough in this industry, I'm a woman. Like, I think we all are like, hey, we're ready to go. I'm excited for my work, right? And let's go for this and see what happens. And for these days, I feel like a lot of what happens are usually microaggressions. So, there are a lot more. I've never had a situation where someone said, "Oh, she's a woman, we can't invest in her," or "She's a woman, no, I don't want to work with her." But usually it's more like microaggressions. So, and sometimes it's because of my age, unfortunately, because of my race combined, maybe. So, for example, I've been mistaken as a waitress like 3 or 4 times at professional like hedge fund events that were like networking and everyone's dressed up. And I have now, unfortunately, I can't wear black anymore because whenever I wear black, people are like, "Excuse me, ma'am, can you take our plates?" And that happens so often to the point where I'm just like, oh my gosh. And so, it's more like an first impression kind of thing, right? When people walk in a room, does this person look like a leader, a CEO, or does this person look like a waitress, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with being waitress. Both of my parents were waiters growing up, so I have all due respect for waiters, but it's just that in a networking event, when you're in the industry, it does, like, that impression does matter, right? And so it's more like microaggressions like that, I guess, that we as women will face. And for me as a woman of color, who I guess I look like a waitress, so that kind of does affect people's impressions of me. And I've had to learn to kind of adapt to that a little bit. Like, I dress a certain way now. I'll try my best to go up to people and try to, join conversations because, like it's hard. People rarely come up to me, and that's okay. And so I've learned I will be the one to always go up to other people and say hi and, meet people, because they're all there to be friendly and meet other people. And everyone has good intentions, by the way. Like, every time I said I'm not a waitress, like people will be really embarrassed and apologize. And, absolutely, it's like, right, your worst nightmare if you thought someone was a waitress and they weren't, like, right. Like, I've had experiences where, I was the, like, I guess, aggressor, you could say. I was the person that was wrong. And unfortunately, we had in our office, we had probably around 500 or so investors come into walk into our office at some point to do due diligence on us. And there was one investor who, a woman, out of 500 people, we had 2 women, by the way, total walk in to the office. And the first time a woman walked in, I assumed that she was like the assistant, the associate, the junior level person, because of my own biases. And then it turns out she's the CEO, and I was like, holy crap, like, I am so embarrassed by that. Like, I cannot believe I made those assumptions. And so just learning that, like, we're all learning here, we're all imperfect. We all have, like, these are all society's assumptions about all of us. And, myself included, like, I make those assumptions too. And so I think there was a lot of unlearning for me to do almost, and have to relearn, like, what a CEO looks like myself, to be able to, like, just get better and improve and stop those, like, my own biases and behaviors like that. So, but yeah, sorry to be all like dreary about that, but I think that's just kind of true. Like, learning to, it's like acknowledging that, like, look, these issues do exist today, but also at the same time, like, we can improve ourselves. And also, I don't want to say it's not on us to educate others, but rather, if it ever kind of bothers you and what I like to do for me personally, everyone has a different approach, by the way. Some people just ignore and just say, like, it's not my job to do this. Some people will sit down and educate the person. Some people, like me, I use humor to like combat the situation. So whenever people ask me to take my plates now, I'll be like, I will take my plates as soon as I give my keynote speech up on stage. And so it just kind of like makes it a little bit more funny. Like they're kind of laughing about it, you know. A lot of people also tell me, this is a weird one too. Like I'm a lot older now, I'm in my mid 30s, but back when, even today, like some people will be like, your parents must be so proud of you. And I'll be like, you know, and it's funny because my co-founder, his parents are dead, right? And it's just like, why do you assume that we're like kids with like living parents, right? Like that's just such a like weird thing to assume. And so I'll be like, oh, thank you, Dale, your parents must be proud of you too. And he kind of is taken aback by the comment, and so just using humor, I think, makes, like, for me, it makes the situation better. It makes me smile and laugh at the situation a little bit, but also helps them realize that, hey, like I just said something weird, sorry to assume that your parents are, alive, right? And so, or that you have a good relationship with your parents. Not everyone does. And so, but yeah, that's kind of what I do. Sorry, that's kind of not the answer you might be looking for.
No, I mean, hey, listen, your experiences are your experiences. And as the industry starts to grow and evolve, the amount of people who are educated within the financial space or educated on the financial space is growing. And a lot of that, as I mentioned, is technology, is more global companies, and accessibility to different types of education, of which, you have this great professional resume, but, your nonprofit and your volunteer work, it's just as impressive. So, like, in what ways did you want to make an impact? Because I have a whole list here of all these programs. We have MIT Corporation Development Committee, Financial Executive Alliance, Board Investing Girls, Boston Alumni for MIT Sloan. I mean, girl, you got a long list here. I mean, it looks great. If this was a varsity jacket, you'd have pins down the arm. You have a great setup here. So it's not like you're just sitting at home with 15 monitors watching the Dow. So what made you want to make such an impact like this? And maybe speak about some of these programs of how people can start to get involved and start to learn a little bit more about the financial space.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's three reasons. One is, to be honest, to settle the cognitive dissonance in my head as I'm by day making billionaires richer. And then after work, I'm like, I need to go volunteer at my local food shelter because I need to be grounded. I'm sick of having parties with these like billionaires, and some of them will fly me out in a jet to their fancy apartment or hotel, whatever, like mansion thing that they have. And it was just like way too much. And they're sometimes it's like the reality. I'm just like, I need to be grounded back in reality again. I need to remember my roots and where I came from. I grew up on welfare and food stamps. Like that is the kind of culture I grew up in. And so I just needed to like remember that and think about like, okay, how can I, help people who are out there, right? And just anything from just being food secure to just basic necessities and things like that. And it wasn't even, yes, some of the nonprofits I do, like for example, Invest in Girls is a great example where they help girls in high school to learn about financial literacy. And these are very often girls who are coming from, very, I guess like just neighborhoods that are, like inner city neighborhoods, or a lot of them have never been in a high-rise building, even though they live in the city. They've never actually been in one of those buildings. On these field trips to these companies and have them learn about the industry, and they're just like blown away by like seeing the city and where they live from like the 50th floor is just such an experience for them. And so just kind of showing them the world, and like the goal isn't to have them all go into finance, although a lot of them do. The goal is mainly like, let's teach them about what's called financial literacy, which is more how do I pay my taxes? How do I prepare for retirement? Should I be saving up money? How can I save up money? How do I open a bank account, right? How do I help my family? And so those are the conversations we're having and teaching them about. And so that's kind of what some of these nonprofits do. And I just absolutely love those kinds of missions as well. But I initially, the other reason I got involved though was also because I think realizing that there was an article I read actually in Harvard Business Review many years ago that said it's about time that women it's about time that women took more board seats within these nonprofit organizations. And I was like, wait a second, like And then it interviewed a bunch of men who, in their 20s, just starting off their career, they're already on a bunch of boards. And I'm like, wait a second, like my classmates in college are taking on these board seats. And here I am, I'm the same age, like I feel like I could do this too. And so then I started volunteering. And then after volunteering, then they were like, hey, would you like to be more involved? And, you could take a potential advisory seat or a board seat and, be more involved that way. And so that's kind of what happened. But it's just like realizing that like a lot of men have their own kind of network. And the other thing I realized, a lot of these boards, by the way, they're father and son, like sitting on these boards. And I'm like, this is like, what an old school network going on here, right? Like father and son, I'm sure how many generations is going on these boards. And so, yeah, I'm like, women don't do that. And we need to. And so started to, decide to put myself out there and to get these positions as well, partially also just to, just to get myself out there and to show that, hey, like I can look like a board member too. I don't necessarily, I can look like a waitress and a board member at the same time. And so just kind of that, changing society's perceptions of like, what that looks like, right, in society. So anyway, so those are some of the reasons. But I think if there's a third reason for sure, I think it's just mainly like, wanting to, do some good, and also join a community outside of work, by the way. It's a great way to join a community that's like outside of work and to contribute in some way. And it can be as easy as just volunteering, right? And, helping to host an event for them, or there's a lot of different ways. I had one friend who volunteered and hosted a chocolate tasting event, which was super fun. So there's all kinds of things you can do to help bring awareness to a cause even. And, it's optional. People can show up and some people might donate or not, but at least it's like just ways of bringing awareness to like a good cause that someone cares about. And so I find that that's such a fun way to just be involved in the community outside of your, like my work was so insular and so it was, like a bubble, right? And so it's nice to step out of the bubble a little bit and to go back into like the real world and real society. So yeah.
Well, I think you brought up really great points. We covered a lot of good stuff. How you learned, how you put it into action, and then how you shared that knowledge with other people and other programs. And I think, from what I can see, you're doing a lot of great stuff. So thanks so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you, Cassidy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great, thanks. So, as always, listeners can learn more about an array of financial topics for free at IBKRcampus.com. Follow us on your favorite podcast network and feel free to leave us a rating or review. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening to IBKR's Sense of Security. As always, there's more content at IBKRpodcast.com. And if you're interested in learning more about interactive brokers, visit IBKR.com. We offer more trading education content such as webinars, market commentary, market-related courses, and quant-related articles at IBKRcampus.com. The analysis in this material is provided for information only and is not and should not be construed as an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to buy any security. To the extent that this material discusses general market activity, industry or sector trends, or other broad-based economic or political conditions, it should not be construed as research or investment advice. To the extent that it includes references to specific securities, commodities, currencies, or other instruments, those references do not constitute a recommendation by IBKR to buy, sell, or hold such investments. This material does not and is not intended to take into account the particular financial conditions, investment objectives, or requirements of individual customers. Before acting on this material, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and, as necessary, seek professional advice.
Hedge funds are highly speculative and investors may lose their entire investment.